welcome to the Inner Core. My name is Paul Rauschenbusch, Associate Dean of Religious Life and the Chapel here at Princeton University. And the Inner Core is a show about morality, about spirituality, and about culture. And I am delighted to welcome Dr. Eboo Patel to be with us today. Dr. Patel is a great encapsulation of all of those things, a spiritual man, a cultural man, and a moral man. Dr. Patel, I'm going to go through this quickly, but I could spend the next 20 minutes just talking about his accomplishments, but he is the founder and the executive director of the Interfaith Youth Corps, located in Chicago, Illinois. He was recently appointed by President Obama to be the part of the Council of the White House Office of Faith-Based and Community Partnerships. He is the author of a wonderful book called Acts of Faith, which we'll talk about more. He is holds a doctorate from Oxford, where he studied with the Rhodes Fellowship. On and on and on. Dr. Patel, welcome to this show. I should be honest, we've been friends a long time, and it's so good to have you here and to talk to you a little bit about your work in the world today. Dr. Patel has a wonderful story. I'm going to start calling you Eboo from now on. Please. I hope that's okay.
Right. I don't think you've ever called me Dr. Patel.
Only in the most formal of moments. Eboo has a wonderful story, and I want you to start. Just tell us where you came from, because let me hold this up. This is Eboo's book called Acts of Faith, and in it you really talk about what it is to grow up as a Muslim in suburban America, and by suburban I mean white Christian America. What does it mean to grow up a Muslim in that situation, and a little bit about your own biography, which has so much influenced the work you're doing today?
Right. Well, 20 years ago, what it meant to grow up as a Muslim in suburban America was to live a very bifurcated life, a faith life at home and in the mosque, and a public life in school and at the YMCA and playing basketball, etc. And to never think that those two narratives, one's faith life and one's life in the public square, would ever meet. And what I recognized was, first of all, how impoverishing that was spiritually, to not be able to bring my faith identity into the public square, to not have a language for that or a set of activities for that.
Because no one knew what you were talking about.
And I didn't have a language for it.
Yeah.
And number two, I think that it wasn't just spiritually impoverishing personally, but it meant that I was not a part of this growing conversation about religion in public life in the 1990s. And so much of that conversation, I think, was dominated by extremists. One of the things that I feel like I saw in my personal narrative, which perhaps was playing out in our public life, was too many people who viewed their faith as self-enriching, were private and quiet about it, which meant that we abandoned the public terrain of faith to loud, often negative, often extremist voices. So
right.
The personal struggle of living a more unified faith life in my whole being and bringing that self to the public square, I think, is also the struggle of a generation trying to enrich the public square with positive conversation about religion.
In your book, Acts of Faith, you talk about how you were tempted by this more extremist path just because you saw so few representatives of your own tradition. You didn't know how to incorporate it into. You thought you had to choose between your Americanism and your faith. I mean, this was a real sort of, perhaps some sort of crossroads that I think a lot of people of faith feel they have to decide between which way they're going to go. And you use this sort of particular vantage point, and you chose to go in a way that really embraced pluralism. Maybe you can tell a little.
Sure. I want to make sure that I'm clear about this, and I talk about the two parts of my story in this regards. When it comes to the dangers that I might have faced when it came to going down a more destructive path, frankly, had nothing to do with religion. It had everything to do with other types of extremism, if you will. When I came to college and I discovered what Michael Harrington called the other America, the America of people eating out of garbage cans for their dinner, the America of battered women who can't find place in shelters, my first response as a 17-year-old was to rage.
Yeah.
And what actually happened was after a couple of years of frankly futile raging, I encountered religious ways of being that, Paul, actually, your family was the Rauschenbusch family and its articulation of the social gospel and the implementation of that by movements like the Catholic Worker, like Engaged Buddhism, like the work of Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel. That played a powerful role in my life in terms of connecting faith and social justice for me. Right. So my danger when I came to what I call the crossroads of inheritance and discovery was not a danger of Muslim extremism. It was a danger of totally irreligious anarchism, if you will. And I was saved, to use a Christian term, by articulations and representations of faith heroes connected to social justice.
That's right. So an engaged religious practice. And so in some ways, you saw these models such as Dorothy Day and others whom you really embraced, and you said, it seems to me that you said, that's something that I can be. And I can be that standing in my own faith, because really what you've become is an example, a model of an engaged, faithful person who is now working so hard to bring people of different religious traditions together. Talk a little bit about the work of the Interfaith Youth Corps and what its basic mission and goals are.
Right. I actually want to bridge a little bit from the first part of your question, which is a personal part, and to say what I am trying to be, and it was first illuminated for me by figures like Dorothy Day, is what Allah tells us in the Holy Quran, which is that He made us to be His Abd and Khalifa, His servant and representative on earth. And that is when I had models like Dorothy Day, and I reconnected with my own tradition through verses like Abd and Khalifa, I felt a sense of wholeness. And I found a path of both, I think, humility and power to walk down.
Isn't that wonderful?
And
I think that's a great religious lesson for all of us. You know, humility and power comes from this religious engagement that calls upon the best of our traditions to go out and engage the world in a positive, constructive way.
Right, right. And so when I encountered Dorothy Day, I had no illusion of wanting to be her. I only wanted to be a part of that energy. I only wanted to live in the world of, as J.M. Coetzee beautifully says, we all come into the world carrying the memory of justice. When I began connecting the justice that I felt in my veins to the source of that, which is God, the all-powerful, I felt a sense of wholeness that I hadn't felt in the past.
Isn't that wonderful? And so out of kind of this empowerment, you created what is now one of the most important interfaith groups in America, and now are on a council advising the president on how to move forward obviously in a very pluralistic nation. So tell me again a little bit about Interfaith Youth Corps and some of its goals and some of the ways it carries out those goals.
Sure. Well, the core principles of the Interfaith Youth Corps are very simple. Religious pluralism is a key to peace in the world. And let me just define religious pluralism very simply. I believe religious pluralism has three dimensions. Number one, respect for people's religious identities, including people with no religious identity. Number two, positive relationships between people of different religious communities. And number three, a collective commitment to the common good. We believe that that ethos that we call religious pluralism is absolutely key to peace in the world. Number two, we believe that young people have to be a key part of building that ethos. One of the reasons for that is purely demographic. We live in a world in which almost 50% of the population is under 35. And the most religiously volatile parts of the world tend to be the youngest. For example, the median age in Iraq is 19.5.
Yeah,
the median
shocking.
age in Afghanistan is under 18. How are these people in very religious parts of the world going to view their religious identities? Are they going to view it as a bubble to isolate themselves? Are they going to view it as a bomb to destroy other people? Are they going to view it as a bridge to connect with other people?
Yeah. One of the important ideas in this book, Acts of Faith, is that you say we should be approaching this with the same kind of urgency and the same kind of resources. We should be approaching young people, encouraging them to engage across religious boundaries and engage constructively with the same sort of sense of purpose that Al-Qaeda recruits young people with a destructive, divisive ideology. And when I read that, I thought, that's it. That's absolutely right. That we need to have this same sort of sense of urgency around this, and because that's really it's a battle of ideas.
I think it's a battle of ideas, and it's then a battle of networks and movements. So if you want to, Al-Qaeda has a big idea, and it's the absolute opposite of religious pluralism. Religious pluralism asks the question, how can we live positively and constructively together? Al-Qaeda makes the statement, how can my identity dominate and destroy your identity?
Right.
Those are two competing ideas in the world. And then what you have is sets of people and institutions building either idea. And my big concern is that you have this huge group of people on the planet, young people between the ages of, say, 12 and 19 or 21 or 22, who are asking the question, who am I? What impact am I going to have? What is my identity? And if we are not advancing the idea of religious pluralism, that you as a Muslim in Afghanistan, you as a Jew in Israel, you as an evangelical or a mainline Christian in the heartland of America, you as a Hindu in India, part of what your faith is about is coming together with people from different backgrounds to build understanding and to serve others. If we're not advancing that idea for this huge, powerful generation of young people, we forfeit the terrain to the Al-Qaedas of the world, to the RSSs of the world, to the Christian identity movements of the world.
Right, but say you're a run-of-the-mill, upstanding Muslim, moderate Muslim, but you're just trying to get by. You're just trying to do the right thing by your own faith tradition, and now here comes Ibu Patel, who's telling me, oh, I have to add this to the already busy things I have to do. Why should, and that's just a Muslim example, why should a Christian, a Jew, a Muslim, why should it be an incorporated part of what their tradition should be about in America?
Right.
Like, well, you must get that question.
I think that's a great question, and I don't think it's an add-on. I think it's at the heart of our traditions. I think the same chapter that I quoted to you of the Holy Quran, which talks about human beings being the Abd and Khalifa of God on earth, that chapter goes on to talk about the importance of engaging diversity. And God telling Adam that we live in a world with different beings and different parts and different pieces, and Adam having the unique gift to be able to name those differences. The suggestion there is that one of the ways that we are God's servant and representative on earth is through a positive engagement of diversity. I view that as absolutely at the heart of the Muslim tradition, perhaps most beautifully articulated in Surah 49, that God made us different nations and tribes so we may come to know one another.
Yeah.
I also think it's at the heart of being an American. George Washington had a Jewish clergy person at his inauguration in 1789. A half-century before that, Ben Franklin helped to build a hall in Philadelphia and said that the pulpit of this hall would be open to a Muslim preacher from Constantinople. This is in the early 18th century in America. We were built not just on religious freedom, but on the idea of a positive engagement with religious diversity. The question is, how are those of us of this generation living that ethic out in the early 21st century?
That's so important. What do you view? It seems like it's not a newsflash that religion is playing an extremely important part in our public square conversations, in our political life, in how we're making decisions on questions of poverty, and all of these political considerations or policy considerations in some ways are coming together in President Obama's council that is meant to be an advisory council for him on community partnerships and faith-based initiatives. How do you view that council as serving these wider goals of America? And speaking in turn to the sort of ardent secularists who say religion should have no part in the White House, and also in terms of people saying, well, you know what, that's all well and good, but this is really fundamentally a Christian nation. And so,
Right.
so I mean, those are two voices that are often in some ways come against one another, but they also come against the idea of pluralism.
Right. Well, I think that pluralism, properly understood, has respect for people with a secularist position and a Christian position, and those positions live within the wider framework of pluralism. Again, pluralism, properly understood, allows those people, ardent secularists and conservative Christians, to live fully in their identity and invites them to bridge and work with people from different identities.
But what if they just say, what if a Christian says, well, that's fine, but this is a Christian nation, I don't want Muslims in the president's council. You know what I mean? Like, these
Right.
are this is real. I mean, this is not a theoretical. And there are other secularists who said religion and state should be completely separate. There's a wall there. We should not have any of this kind of stuff.
Well, I think, first of all, those are actually erroneous views of American history, and the examples that I gave you about George Washington and Ben Franklin earlier, there are examples of Jefferson, there's examples of Madison, there's many examples of our founding fathers embracing people of different faiths, not because they agreed with those faiths, but because they understood that they were building a new community, which in many ways was the first participatory society with people of different religious and ethnic backgrounds.
Yeah.
So I would say we need to live into that dream of America.
That's right. I agree with you completely. And I think also what we're trying to build is not just this for America's sake, but I do think that we have the potential of offering an example of how to do this well. I mean, in some ways, for all of the European criticism of the United States, we've in some ways incorporated different religious traditions better than the Europeans.
I don't think I lived in Europe for almost 4 years, and I would say not just in some ways, but perhaps in all ways we have done that. I mean, the way that Muslims are both integrated in and contribute to American life vis-a-vis their counterparts in Europe, I think is a stark example of this. But I agree with you. I think that this is a part of the American ideal, which is not simply having a nation of people from different religious backgrounds, but actually that nation calling on those different religious communities and saying to them, we want you to contribute to the common good out of your Jewish inspiration, out of your Muslim inspiration, out of your Baptist, Catholic, Buddhist, secularist inspiration. We are connecting people's particular identity with the public square. That is a remarkable endeavor, and one that I think in the early 21st century, which is too much defined by religious conflict, should very much be held up and lived out.
That's right. Well, we should also say that this is part of the mission of the President's Council, and I'm just wondering though, when we work out of our particularities, so I work out of my Christian context, you work out of your Muslim context, and others work out of their whichever context. Now, one of the main questions that's going to face your advisory council is the question of discrimination on hiring, because people are going to be getting federal money to do, some sort of generally do-gooder organizations, feeding the poor, something like that, some sort of helping with social services, but from a religious framework. In your estimation, and you don't have to go on record, you can change your mind after leaving the inner core, that's allowed, but should a religious organization be able to discriminate on the basis of religious affiliation or sexuality or any other sort of criteria that does not match the particular nature of that religious community? Because that's really, going to be everybody's kind of lining up for ACLU and Focus on the Family are already gearing up for this big fight. What do you think is that going to be the outcome of that?
So my personal response to this, as somebody who is involved across the board on this, which is to say I'm part of a particular religious community and therefore hold the set of concerns that a particular religious community would, which is, can we run this religious community the way that we feel called to by our tradition and by the divine? I'm also part of a variety of social service organizations which seek federal funding to carry out their programs. I actually think there's a relatively pragmatic answer to this, which is religious communities should be allowed to worship and to carry out their prayer lives and their worship lives the way they see fit. A Catholic church should be able to hire a Catholic priest to perform Catholic Mass. That should be done using the resources of that community. When a community seeks federal funds for separate programs, like after-school programs, sports programs, homeless shelters, those federal funds should be used in accordance with constitutional principles and federal law. But I think both can coexist. In fact, both do coexist.
But I think, it seems to me few people are arguing that question. It seems like the second part is really where the rubber is hitting the road. And some people would say, well, those are still part of our church. Those are still part of our mosque. Those are still part of our synagogue. We don't have to hire someone who doesn't agree with our principles. And you're saying that probably that should. I don't want to press you too hard on this.
Actually, I think that this is President Obama's understanding also, at least as far as I understand it from the speeches that he gave when he was a candidate, is that we understand the importance of maintaining the integrity of faith communities, and they get to hire who they want to hire using their own resources. But when they apply for federal funds for social programs, we expect them to run their programs according to constitutional principle. But we understand that, what happens in the church part of a Catholic church might be different than what happens in the basketball gym that Catholic church builds. There is also gray area here, and let me say, going back to what you were saying earlier, that these questions are going to come before the council. My brain is actually too small to process such questions, and President Obama, I think, recognized that and has said that there will be other people in his administration looking at those questions. So these questions are not going to come to people like me to decide constitutional matters. The Attorney General is going to be involved, the White House Counsel is going to be involved, etc.
Yeah.
What I'm excited about when it comes to the Faith Council is advancing some of the priority areas that the President has set forth, one of which is interfaith cooperation. The Faith Council, in my view, is not a group of people who come together and pontificate several times a year and put a sheet before the President at the end of the year. It says, you should do this. When I got the appointment to the Faith Council, I thought to myself, wow, this adds on several hours to my work week, because now the expectation and the opportunity to build interfaith cooperation has grown, and that gives me that much more to do and that much more excitement around the possibilities of this work.
Right. Well, it is wonderfully exciting, and I think that you've articulated well. It'll be interesting to see how this all shakes down, and it's exciting. But in our last moments together, tell me how you envision, like, say all your work actually, you live long enough to see the fruits of it. I mean, I think a lot of us, inshallah. I think that a lot of us we do what we can in this lifetime, hoping that we are part of a long trajectory, a moral arc towards justice. What would you like to see in America in 20 years out? What's your vision for your own wider work with the Interfaith Youth Corps, but then also with just as part of like what you hope your legacy will be?
Right. So I don't want to talk about my legacy or my work. I mean, the truth is I am proud to be part of a movement in which I get to call you a colleague and a friend and a mentor, because what you've been doing here at Princeton with the Faith Council, what college chaplains, what pastors and rabbis, what other people who started interfaith organizations, we're a movement, and we're finding each other, and we're moving together. So what could be the results of our movement in 2 decades? One thing to think about abstractly is that interfaith cooperation becomes a behavioral norm in America, in the same way that recycling has become a behavioral norm. Which is to say that there's an ethos in the country which is absorbed by the population that you positively engage religious diversity, whether it's on the PTA, whether it's in your book club, whether it's through congregational exchanges between synagogues, mosques, and churches. I'll give you a couple of illustrations of this. What if every campus in America had what Princeton has, which is an interfaith council, and those campuses, that interfaith council had a set of internal interfaith discussions and also did a set of external programs like Days of Interfaith Youth Service. What if every synagogue, mosque, church, temple, secular humanist society was involved in congregational exchanges, the way that most of these institutions are now involved in some kind of service work? That might not have been true a half century ago. It might not have been status quo. What if we built a new status quo that involved interfaith cooperation?
And I think what we do in America, whatever people might say about are we on our way up or are we on our way down, we still have vast power to influence what's going on around the world.
Absolutely.
With the kind of financial and leadership role. And I think what we decide to do in our congregations here, whether it's Christian, Muslim, Jewish, Hindu, Buddhist, Sikh, Jain, whatever, it gets reflected in India, in Pakistan, in the Middle East. All of these things have ripple effects. We do have the power not only to affect our local neighborhoods, but what we do locally. Think locally, act locally,
right.
Think globally.
Right.
I think it's this interesting sort of interchange of ideas, and so I think that what you're doing and what other leaders like yourself are doing is a wonderful example for us. In this final moment, are there in your work, are there a few names of people who we should be looking at, or books that we should be reading that you want to recommend outside of your own work? Are there books or names? Are there resources that we can go to help us do this work better? This work of pluralism, this work of engagement, this work of positive interchange between religious communities.
Well, I'd like to offer the website of my organization.
Yes, please do.
The Interfaith Youth Corps, CORE, and the website is ifyc.org, and we have a set of curricula up there. We have training guides for how to run your own day of interfaith youth service. We sponsor an online social network called the Interfaith Bridge Builders Network with over 1,000 people who are in a constant discussion of the concrete interfaith projects they're running. So I'd love to offer that as a concrete resource.
ifyc.org.
That's correct.
Yeah, that's really important.
I want to offer one more idea, which is to take a figure who we all know about, but who we view as maybe a civil rights hero, or an African-American hero, or a Christian hero, or an American hero, and turn him into a global interfaith hero. I'd like to invite people to go back and look at the work of the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., how he was inspired by the example of Mahatma Gandhi, by both the Reverend Benjamin Hayes and by Mordecai Johnson, how King learned about Gandhi through his undergraduate and seminary years, how he applied Gandhian techniques during the Montgomery bus boycott in 1955, how he went to India in 1959 and was blown away by the religious diversity of India, how he met the Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel in 1963, marched with him in Selma a couple of years later, began a correspondence with the venerable monk Buddhist Thich Nhat Hanh, and look at King as an interfaith hero.
That is a wonderful example. And Heschel said famously, I felt like I was praying with my feet.
That's right, during the march in Selma.
During the march in Selma. So thank you so much for that. And thank you for being with us here on the Interfaith. Now I'm using your name. It's the Inner Core. It's the Inner Core. And thank you for joining us. I hope that you have been inspired to get out there and engage your local community, people from across religious backgrounds. If you're seeing this and it's before April 26th, we will be having an Interfaith Day of Youth service, and you can go to the Princeton website and learn more about it at the Office of Religious Life website at Princeton University. We hope to see you there. We'll be building a community garden in Trenton. So thank you once again, Dr. Patel. I'll say that one more time, and thank you for joining us here at the Inner Core.